In the months since the October 7th attacks, some major international bodies like Human Rights Watch and the UN have put out these incredibly detailed investigative reports. What they're trying to do is build a factual, evidence-based account of what happened on a day that, while being one of the most documented in history, is also one of the most fiercely debated.
That title from the Human Rights Watch report, it really hits you, doesn't it? It just captures the sheer trauma of that day. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through the evidence that they and the UN collected. We'll look at how they did it, how they established the facts, and what those facts actually tell us.
The scale of this assault was just unprecedented. Fighters didn't just cross the border. They breached the barrier separating Gaza and Israel by land, by sea, and even by air using things like paragliders. It was a massive, simultaneous attack on dozens of different civilian communities and military bases.
Now let's talk about this number, 809. According to the UN, that is the minimum number of civilians they could confirm were killed. And that precision is really important because what the reports are trying to make clear is that in so many cases, the main targets were, in fact, non-combatants.
And when you look at who these victims were, it was an incredibly diverse group. Out of 815 civilians killed, a number that Human Rights Watch cross-referenced from multiple sources, we know that at least 282 were women and 36 were children. And the death toll also included 79 foreign nationals, a lot of whom were farm workers from places like Thailand and Nepal.
So, the big question is, how did investigators piece all of this together? I mean, you have the chaos of the attacks themselves, and then this political firestorm that erupts right after. Just establishing a verified timeline of what happened was a monumental challenge.
The reports go into incredible detail about their process. It was this modern, multifaceted investigation, combining old-school detective work with really cutting-edge digital forensics to create the clearest possible picture of what went down that day.
To build an account that they could actually stand behind, investigators used this really rigorous three-step process. They started by collecting everything they could. Hundreds of witness interviews, tons of video. Then came verification, geolocating videos to prove where they were filmed, analyzing metadata. Only then did they bring in independent pathologists to analyze it all for patterns of violence.
But, and this is a huge but, their work faced major roadblocks. The UN reported that Israel wouldn't grant them access to the attack sites. That, plus a lack of systematic evidence collection on the ground, created some pretty big gaps. So what do? Well, you get creative. They had to rely heavily on remote interviews and this incredibly deep forensic analysis of publicly available digital evidence.
So, now that we know how they investigated, what did this whole process actually uncover? Well, the findings from both Human Rights Watch and the UN were stark. They concluded that numerous acts committed on October 7th legally qualify as war crimes. So what exactly is a war crime in this context? It's not just a buzzword. It has a very specific legal meaning. It's a serious violation of international law that's committed with criminal intent. This is the key part. We're not talking about collateral damage. We're talking about the deliberate targeting of civilians, murder, torture, taking hostages, all things that are explicitly forbidden by the Geneva Conventions.
And what the reports found wasn't just a few isolated incidents. They documented a clear pattern of war crimes. They showed a systematic approach that moved beyond individual acts. This included deliberately targeting civilians, murder, hostage-taking, and acts of torture, all of which formed the basis for their legal conclusion.
Now we have to talk about one of the most painful and frankly most contested aspects of the October 7th attacks. The investigative bodies knew they had to address this question directly based on whatever evidence they could find.
The UN's findings relied on a specific legal standard here, reasonable grounds to believe. Now, they were definitely hampered by the lack of forensic evidence, but even without it, they found credible information that pointed to rape and gang rape, especially at the Nova Music Festival. This was based on patterns they had identified, like how many victims were found naked or bound, or with injuries that suggested sexualized torture.
And that quote, it really gets to the heart of the matter, right? It's this powerful call to recognize that in a conflict, sexual violence isn't just some horrible byproduct of chaos. It's a deliberate tactic. It's a weapon of war. And it demands to be treated as such under international law.
All right, so beyond just documenting the crimes themselves, The reports also tried to figure out who was actually responsible. They worked to trace the actions of specific armed groups and individuals across all those different attack sites in southern Israel.
You know, what's pretty incredible about these reports is just how specific they get with accountability. By analyzing verified videos, witness testimony, even the insignia on fighters' uniforms, investigators could actually link specific armed groups to particular locations. For example, the evidence placed the military wings of both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad right at the scenes in places like Be'eri and Nir Oz.
Now, for its part, Hamas has put out its own version of events. In a document from January 2024, the leadership officially stated that their fighters were specifically instructed to avoid harming civilians. They claimed the civilian deaths were basically a result of chaos, confusion, or even friendly fire from Israeli forces. But, and you knew there was a but coming, both the UN and Human Rights Watch reports say that this claim is flatly contradicted by a mountain of evidence. They point to hundreds of verified videos and survivor testimonies that show militants deliberately targeting, killing, and abducting civilians from the very first moments of the attack. And the UN report adds another really important, complex layer to this story. It presents verified evidence that after the armed groups first breached the border, some unarmed civilians from Gaza also crossed into Israel and, in places like Nir Oz, actually participated in abductions and looting. So obviously, the impact of October 7th goes way, way beyond that one day. The attacks themselves, and these reports trying to make sense of them, have kicked off all these legal debates, societal aftershocks, and a fierce, fierce battle over the entire narrative. The UN report also took a hard look at the Israeli military's response on the day itself. And one of the most controversial things it examined was the alleged use of the Hannibal Directive, a military procedure designed to stop soldiers from being captured, even if it means risking their lives and the lives of any hostages with them.
And to back this up, investigators cited this specific, just chilling quote from an Israeli tank commander. He actually told Israeli media that he fired on a vehicle he believed was carrying abducted Israelis back to Gaza, saying he'd rather stop the abduction even if it killed them. The report also notes at least one hostage, Efrat Katz, is killed by Israeli helicopter fire as she was being taken into Gaza.
And the geopolitical shockwaves, well, they were felt all over the world. One academic study that surveyed Jewish professionals in North America found a huge spike in workplace anti-Semitism after October 7th. The study points out that while hostility was already a problem on campuses, workplaces saw this really abrupt rise in harassment and exclusion.
And that brings us to this final and maybe most important question. These reports from the UN and Human Rights Watch, they represent this massive, painstaking effort to build a factual record. But they're being released into a world where the narrative itself has become a battlefield. And that leaves us all with a profound challenge. When the documented facts themselves are under attack, how is memory preserved?